What was your interest in / familiarity with MMOs before working on them?
I started as a player, and over time I was in a guild. And in my guild, I was lamenting my current profession as internal communications / journalism, no offense. And I think I said the same to David. And I was fascinated with the sociology of gaming and why I was completely driven to be in the guild and why I was happy to be an officer and all the drama and taking 3 days off work to camp some stuff. And one of the guys in my guild revealed that he was a high elf mage, female. He revealed that he was actually on the dev team, and I'd known him at that point for 2.5 years. And so he basically got me an interview, and then I ended up on the dev team.
So how would you describe the culture and environment at SOE when you started?
I'd call it like the Wild West. So there was no game design discipline, there was no schooling. I think there was one ad that used to show like play games all day and get paid, and that was the depth of it. So we were really just as experts in EverQuest, every single person on the team understood as well RPGs and where we thought we should take the game. And it really was the Wild West. Nothing was off the table. It was all about what's the best game we can make for our fans.
Writing for an MMO seems like it would require you to serve two different masters, players interested in lore and players who just want to run around and get loot. Going back to your early days on the dev team, do you feel your and the teams at large writing favored one type of player over another? If not, how did you manage to design content that kept both types of players interested?
For those players that are separated in that way, the ones that are achievement focused and want loot, they don't read things anyway. So for the people that were really enamored by the EverQuest story, you brought up a subject that's very close to my heart. I used to be called the lore lady at the time, and I became the assistant lead content designer. So I was very invested on making sure everything was accurate. We double, triple checked all of our facts to make sure we weren't contradicting ourselves within our own lore. And trying to establish what the world rules were. So for those people that care, they care very much, and you can't make mistakes. So we did focus on that a lot, but people who like loot don't read things. They still don't.
Over the last 20 years, do you feel EverQuest story content has come to favor one type of player more than another?
Not particularly, no. There's been a number of designers that all have a different tact. So every designer that's focused on a particular area of design approaches content in their own way. So for example, if we were going to go back a period of time, we did the epic quests. And one designer would be responsible for one or two of those. And we took our own tact with those particular quests. So it comes from a variety of places and inspirations, and a lot of our designers were tabletop players, so very practiced in creating pretty deep stories and justifications for doing quests and stuff.
Moby Games lists Lost Dungeons of Norrath as your first expansion that you worked on.
Yeah.
How far along was Lost Dungeons when you joined SOE?
I think they just figured, so instances weren't a thing in gaming at the time. And our engineers and artists had just figured out how we were going to create dynamically generated doors and how we were going to set these zones up to appear as instances. So the content was wide open. And so when I came in, they were like, what's the content for Lost Dungeons? I'm what? Okay. And everyone was super supportive. We came up with a crazy lore faction-based distribution system. You know, looking back on it, probably would have done it 5 other ways, just because it was a bit clunky, good in theory, but it was literally like get in and define the lore for each dungeon. And I can't remember, I think it was 40 individual stories within each dungeon. I can't even remember how many dungeons there were, but it felt like a lot. I'd say 5.
Yeah, it might have been. I think it might have been even more.
God, yeah.
Each expansion seemed to highlight different features, new regions, high-level content, new items, etc. How was the feature attraction, the centerpiece of any given expansion's content, decided on?
I wish I could say it was academically brilliant, but it's literally like, that's cool, let's do it. Because we're all players ourselves, and we kind of knew where we wanted the game to go and evolve to. We weren't trying to, solve any huge problems and win any well, now we're always trying to win prizes. That's kind of why we're gamers, I figure. But it was just, and we still do that today. There's a gut check of what's the coolest thing to do. So there's game health things you focus on and quality of life within the game, but there's things that you think are just cool and right for your particular game.
In general, did an expansion's gameplay and or features come first before its lore, or did lore inform gameplay and features?
I think it was lore and story first. It's actually, I don't know. I think it all kind of came together at once. We would have these giant design meetings, and at least at the time, the lead designer would pitch the story, and then the features would I think the feature track would develop independently, sort of things we knew we wanted to do in the game. But for Lost Dungeons of Norrath, for example, because we wanted to go deeper into those really iconic areas in the game, the features sort of rose from it. So doing instance dungeons, for example, where you could go in a group and raid, and do that individually without having to queue up and wait in our static content. So solving a problem and the lore sort of evolved together in that case.
Was the goal of each expansion to keep current players happy and busy, or to entice new players to the game, or was it both?
So obviously at first it's to continue to entice new players and keep your current players happy, but at some point we sort of hit this, we hit a milestone where we went from being a new game to an existing current modern popular game to a mature title to, at some point it felt like 2014 maybe, it went over into nostalgia. And at that point we've been sort of going back to our roots, exploring stories from the beginning, and this is a reacquisition focus. So we're not spending a lot of our time and focus on getting new players, because it's 20 years of a game that is 20 years old. And there's a certain amount of skill and acceptance you need to have when you play this game, and admire it for its charms of being developed for Windows 95. So although we have modernized it, but it's all about capturing the hearts and minds and charming the people who played it in its early years and bringing them back, and we've been really successful at it.
Another main feature was the inclusion of broad-based instance dungeons, which you had mentioned. Did instant-based dungeons change any of your writing processes in regard to conception or implementation?
It was a nightmare because content EQ would live on its own in the public shared space. When you're trying to deliver for one individual who may be advancing at a different pace than someone else in the same area, not trying to preserve the story for that particular person becomes a very challenging task when it comes to scripting and all the things we did in design, variables and things on players that are can get a bit dicey. And it's also a strange experience, very much like WoW later did phasing. How do you make decisions about how to preserve the experience of the story for the player?
One noteworthy feature of Lost Dungeons was that it was offered as a digital download, but Sony incentivized users who purchased the boxed edition by giving them free in-game goodies. If memory serves correctly, this period was right on the cusp of PC gaming going almost 100% digital, right around the advent of Steam. What was that period like in the trenches of development, so to speak? Did the team give any thought to things like incentivizing the purchase of one edition of a game over another?
That was very new ground for us at the time. And as much as we were thrilled to be able to shift into a purely live service environment, because Gold Master, I'm sure as you can appreciate, is an absolute nightmare for a live product. But you feel like it was double-edged, because you feel like you're missing that physical thing you can hang on to. For example, one of our designers still has his original receipt from his March 16th purchase of his first EverQuest box while he was a player. And it's a physical thing, it's a memory. Yeah, it's that guy. And that, for us, it was very hard to let go of this idea of having something physical in your hands that belonged to you and was a memory. But over time, we started to recognize the benefits of how, especially for a live service product, how quickly you can fix things and how fluid it can be. And then very shortly after that, we started thinking, well, we should offer variations of this product even within the digital space. And over many, many years, we started developing that notion for EverQuest and EverQuest 2.
So as a writer, how early did you get involved in the creative process of designing, developing an expansion?
And as a designer, probably the design team would say I got involved too early. So it's amazing how, looking back, and we still do take things very seriously, but and sometimes it does a really good job to define for the team how your content can be cohesive. So you establish, what are the racial norms for a new race you add into the game? What are some of their habits and traits? Sometimes you can define how do they speak? What is their language akin to in English or some other language in the world? And quite often, academically, it seems amazing. And then on occasion, it's not so awesome. So sometimes when you let that get away from you, it can sometimes not be super great. So Gates of Discord, I worked with the team on building sort of for one of the races, we called them Muramites, and it was a very consonant heavy language and how these characters were named. And so we'd have characters that had like 5 or 6 consonants in a row and things you absolutely can't pronounce, and that's when it's on me. I've been apologizing for it since 2004, I think. But this is one of those things where if you kind of let it get away from you and the spirit is lost, that you can end up with those kinds of things, and you start recognizing how important it is that your game and the main characters be pronounceable. We have a lot of examples where that's not necessarily been the case, and it loses something, especially when players are constantly sharing who they need to fight, who they need to kill. When you can pronounce them, it's helpful.
So yeah, how's writing content changed from when you started on EverQuest to now?
I don't do it anymore, thankfully.
Well, there you go.
Alan does it. But honestly, every year, the bar just gets set higher and higher because the team as well is sort of advancing and evolving in the profession. And you get to see examples, and I do think it's one of the very few industries where we know so many people within the industry itself and really great examples of talented people and how we can advance our skills and improve our own content. And that's sort of an ongoing education that we take on ourselves and the team takes on itself just to make things better. It's always about making a better product and doing a better job.
What are some aspects of writing content for an expansion that most players may not notice but are important from a design and development standpoint?
I find one of the biggest challenges is dialogue and really building character. And in EverQuest in particular, there's a lot of conversations that happen with NPCs. And that's in a lot of ways where the magic happens. And that is very challenging, is to only have, a limited number of words to make a character's tone and mood come through, and also to do humor. So we have some very talented designers on our team that are actually really good at that, and it's a very rare skill.
Of the expansions you've written for, which is your favorite and why?
I think my favorite was always the Serpent Spine. We got to explore some really amazing fantasy regions, Bixies and dragons and more dragons in that particular one, and it felt really deep and broad as far as fantasy or a high fantasy RPG goes.
And on the flip side, which expansion story was the most challenging, either from a creative standpoint or technically?
Gates of Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for a bunch. So so many things happened during that production cycle. One being, we had this vision for what this world would look like. And we had some zones made, and it was supposed to feel like a really organic space, like the ground was meant in one area to feel like a bit flesh, and the trees would almost be like veins and stuff, and we got it, and it was like a steak exploded. It was really strange, and so we were looking at it going, we can't rescue this. We've got to throw everything out and start over. And we did, and I basically succeeded in making everything unnameable for the Muramites, as I was telling you. So I thought it was super smart to define how we would pronounce and present this one particular kind of character. And it didn't go well, but everything else did. And it's funny how when we launched then, we also had implemented DirectX 9 and basically broke everything and launched too soon. And we were doing 6-month expansions at that time, which we discovered very quickly that that's too fast for the team, especially with testing. And if we're upgrading tech, which we did then and we continue to do, we test it more now. So that one, I think, was the most complicated because we were trying to adjust to a new design philosophy, new zones, everything was coming in hot, and we had all this new tech, and we didn't have time to vet everything. But now people look back at it and go, that was the best expansion that ever happened. And where were you?
What period or expansion or game do you feel was the peak of EverQuest popularity, and why?
It was probably between, they were successive, and this is, I'm speaking as a player. So we had Runes of Kunark, which came out, I'm like, ooh, trees moving, and then my PC wouldn't work. I had way too much lag. So I got to upgrade my PC for the cool price of probably $3,000 in those days. And then Scars of Velius, like, ooh, snow, it's amazing, and dragons. And then Planes of Power for me was, that took fantasy to a whole other level where you're fighting gods and these really truly mythical planar creatures and stuff. And that to me was my high point, and it was while I was raiding in that expansion that I got the job on the team.
The fact that EverQuest is still going strong after 20 years later is incredible. I feel the same way about Shacknews. As a writer, what were some of the challenges in keeping players interested as EverQuest aged?
So, as I said, we start from the new, very much, role-playing game, mud-based, tabletop, dare we say, Dungeons and Dragons kind of feeling experience. And how far do you go? So for a lot of us, the Shadows of Luckland expansion, for example, where we went to the moon, and there's all these crazy creatures that didn't feel classically oriented to high fantasy. Me personally, I wasn't a huge fan. And that creates discussions of what is EverQuest and how true are we to these really classic high fantasy roots? And there has to be a bit of both. There has to be some balance. You have to, strive to reach new heights, which we still do now, and always focus on the creative aspect that has the foundation in high fantasy. But we always have to stay true. It's basically, you want to see your fantasies and your dreams come to life. And so that's sort of the foundational piece. And then the team creates these really creative twists on those classic themes.
What does it mean to you to be part of EverQuest on its 20th anniversary and beyond?
For me, this has been an incredibly humbling journey, mostly because quite often you hear about executive producers as we lead the team, but basically my team leads me. So every success we've had has been the team telling me what they think is the right thing to do and me being there to support them. I'm incredibly grateful for the gifted people that I work with and the community itself. This game has thrived and existed because of the community and the dependency, not just in the mechanics of the classes and the roles that you play, but they bind to each other. And the magic of this game is that they do need each other. And in needing each other, this community has grown. We don't give them a lot up front. They get to discover it for themselves and be experts and share with each other. And that's something we want to stay with and continue. Do it for Shacknews.
Oh yeah.